you don't need a surplus at all to maximize hypertrophy. Storing fat is not needed to maximize hypertrophy. But there's a caveat to that.
Welcome to Anabolic Analysis, the show where we bring clarity to training, nutrition, and physique development by speaking with coaches, researchers, and bodybuilders about how they interpret the evidence and apply it in the real world. Less guessing, more growing. Today, we are here with King Deltoids. For anyone who may not know, who are you? What do you do? And what areas of training or nutrition are you most interested in?
So my name is King Deltoids, aka Braden, and I go to school for exercise science. I am currently going in my senior year for my bachelor's. And I post on social media under the title King_Deltoids. And I just post a bunch of stuff related to the gym, hypertrophy, nutrition, and all that kind of stuff.
What does your current training look like? What split are you running and why?
Right now, I'm doing full body every other day, only because I do think full body is on paper the best split you could do. Which there's a different bunch of variables, but my reasoning is that I'm on a very aggressive deficit right now because I am going to do a competition here in November, and this deficit is just messing up my
Nice.
recovery. So I can't train back to back, or the super spinal fatigue from the muscle damage accumulation from training the day before really throws me off. It throws off my entire day. Like I get this insane tired sensation and just ruined my day. And ever since I switched, it just all disappeared and I feel great.
Okay. So are you doing mainly single sets when you're doing?
Yeah,
Your
I do
full body
single
every other day?
sets, 20 exercises, one set each, which like my ab crunch, I do 2 sets, and calves, I do 2 sets, but that's the only thing I do multi sets on.
Okay. And then what about nutrition? You mentioned that you're cutting. Obviously, you're in show prep. How many weeks out are you?
I'm coming up about 16 weeks now.
Okay. So what's the nutrition approach look like? And then what are the main variables that you pay attention to?
So right now I'm doing a high carb and low carb day. So it's a higher cal day, lower cal day on rest day, higher cal on training day. It's just a way to get less calories throughout the week, because on rest day, you're not really doing much except for getting your steps in. I don't really got to worry about performance at all. I do a higher protein approach because we do have some data suggestion that lean body mass is retained, muscle mass is retained with higher proteins with extreme deficits. So it's just getting my minimum fats in, making sure I'm getting my omega-3s and omega-6s, and then just getting enough protein and filling carbs in where they needed.
So when you say higher protein, what are we talking here in terms of gram per pound?
Gram per pound, it's about a gram per pound of body weight. Give or so a little bit less, give or so a little
Okay.
maintain. Because
So
I do have some variance in what type of lean protein I have, so it can change, like fluctuate between like 10 grams.
okay. But mainly we're sitting, because what do you weigh right now?
Right now, I'm 171.4 pounds as of this morning.
Okay.
So it's
you're
roughly
sitting
like
around that
160,
170.
180. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. And then for fats, minimum intake, so you're around that 0.3 grams per pound?
I more so just get to a point where I'm around like 40 grams a day, because there are some suggestions that we do need like 10 grams of fats per meal for proper bile release for hormones. But other than that, all of it is just like filled in with omega-3s and omega-6s.
Okay. So yeah, fairly low fat, high carb, high protein diet,
Mhm.
pretty traditional. What size deficit are you in right now? Like in terms of calories per day,
So
roughly?
my maintenance is around like 29, 27 to 3,000 calories. It depends, because I do a lot of physical activity. I do track and field in college, so I have to practice. So my days of activity are going to fluctuate. It's around like well over 1,000 calorie deficit a day, with my rest day being like 1.4 thousand calorie deficit.
Okay. So yeah, fairly steep deficit. And yeah, I pulled up so for anyone that's unfamiliar with the evidence that he's talking about for the protein intake and fat-free mass or muscle mass retention during a deficit, the biggest study that we have is the meta-analysis from Refalo and colleagues on protein in a deficit in trained lifters. And essentially what they found is just a linear dose response of protein in terms of per gram or per kilogram, obviously scientific literature. Grams per kilogram, it's just a linear relationship of more protein, more lean mass retention. And this is obviously strictly talking about trained lifters in deficits. And I tend to agree that And of course, we're talking natural. That's
Yep, yep.
an important caveat here. We know that anabolics do have some protein sparing effects. So if you see enhanced lifters, they might be doing lower protein approaches, and that's normally because they can because of the special supplements that they're on. But even when we look at anecdotal evidence, there's another study where they did a basically just survey of natural bodybuilders, of the top competitors, of the people who placed highest, and their protein intakes by the end of their preps, the median was around 1.5 grams per pound. So we do see just in the evidence from, obviously we have the Ruffalo meta regression, and then we just have the anecdotal evidence that keeping your protein high as a natural bodybuilder is something that you want to do during your deficit. And of
Mhm.
course, we want to keep the fats above the minimum, mainly just for hormones. And again, that's another thing where people will see. I think there's been a lot of confusion in the industry just because people will see what enhanced people are doing with their nutrition and their
Absolutely.
training and try to apply it to themselves.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's why the bro
And
split
because with
exists, is
fats
because of
specifically,
steroids.
the main detriment, yeah,
Mhm.
100%. Well, I mean, the bro split, the low fat, because you can drop your fats to basically non-existent levels at if you're because the main detriment from low fat intake is going to be that your test is going to drop to your old girl. But if you're getting that test exogenously, then there's no reason you don't care about losing your natural ability to make it because it's already on. Why higher protein in a deficit is a good idea. First, what is your main reason? Like if you had to narrow it down to if we're
So
saying why do we think this relationship occurs?
I think we need to separate normal deficits to starvation deficits. You know what I'm saying? They are two physiologically different things with different mechanisms approaching. In a severe deficit, your stressors are going to be increased. Your glucocorticoids skyrocketing. Your AMPK is going to be skyrocketing. Nitrogen balance loss is going to be higher than if you were just in a regular deficit. All those things add up that which potentially could mean that more protein, higher protein intake is able to retain contractile tissue, actual muscle, compared to a regular deficit where that regular deficit might not become a stressor or AMPK might not be increased severely or your basal MPS might not be reduced significantly to cause any sort of benefits of more amino acid, more protein.
Yeah. No, I mean, the main thing that I normally think about with why higher protein is better in deficits is we have obviously the satiating effect is the one thing that people talk about a lot, but I really, both from the literature and from anecdotal evidence of just changing my own protein up and changing it for my clients, I really haven't noticed a difference in satiety. And
Mhm.
even when we do look at the like, yes, this is one of those things of where this is the point of the podcast is where we look at, there's things in data that really don't translate as well into the real world. And so, yes, protein should be the most satiating and it is on paper. But what I've noticed with myself and with my clients is if I shift 20 to 30 grams of protein into carbs, there's really no difference in satiety that I've seen, especially if we're taking those 20 to 30 grams of protein and making it 20 to 30 grams of carbs. And the carb source is like potatoes or broccoli or something like that, because the actual volume and density of food that you're getting is still very high.
Mhm.
And then when we look at the other thing with protein is the thermic effect of food is a little bit higher. Obviously, it's the highest. So it takes, you protein. But then when we're really looking at that, thermic effect of food is only 5% of your TDEE. So we're really getting into the
Marginally
minute
thin.
details
Yep.
here.
Yep.
So if we're taking like the amount of calorie burn, the difference in calorie burn is going to be so minute
Mhm.
from switching. Again, if we're just taking 30 grams from your protein and shoving it into carbs, that difference is going to be tiny. And then I think another reason is that it's just storing protein as fat is a very inefficient process. Storing a triglyceride as a triglyceride, that's easy. That's great. Your body doesn't really have to do much. Doesn't have to do anything really. But it does have to do a rather energy intensive process. That's why the thermic effect of food is higher for protein, because it's harder to digest. You have to break those amino acids up and then change them to store them as fat.
That's also a great point about just like how the overfeeding papers we have on more protein, our body would rather just piss it out than turn it into a triglyceride. Now, over time, yeah, we're going to turn
Mhm.
that into fat, but short term, our body just doesn't want to. It's just too much energy. It's not efficient.
No, it's not. And for anyone unfamiliar, the papers that he's referring to, they are the Jose Antonio studies. He's done about 4, and each one of them, they overfed people by a lot. I believe up to
Mhm.
over 4 grams per pound, I
Yeah,
think,
it was a
in
lot.
or 4 grams per kilogram, sorry. It was a lot of protein, and strictly protein. It was supplemented in terms of egg white. So, yeah, 4.2 grams per kilogram of fat mass. Uh, and they didn't see any increase in fat mass. And obviously there's limitations with this. They used
Mhm.
bod pod, and they weren't super in depth with the tracking. It wasn't a super controlled study. But when you do something and one of the studies, it wasn't the highest protein one. One of them, they actually saw a recomp effect where they got
Mhm.
leaner and increased muscle mass. Again, people are going to bring up the bod pod. But when you see the same thing with this overfeeding of
Yep.
4 different
Mhm.
studies of just shoveling protein down these people's gullets and they aren't getting fat, that shows you that mechanism. At minimum, that mechanism is there of just fat,
Mhm.
of it being harder to store protein as fat. The practical takeaway here is keep your protein relatively high as a natural in a deficit, especially, and
Mhm.
then the larger the deficit you're going into, there's a couple different variables that are going to change the protein. So the larger the deficit, you're going to probably want to keep your protein higher.
Mhm.
The more mass that you have, and the later you are in your career. So if you're a noob and if you're in a noob in a small deficit, you probably don't need to have your protein very high.
Like
But if
I
you've been
said
training for
before,
5 years
the
and you're in a bodybuilding
psychological
prep,
like I said before, the psychological differences of starvation, aggressive deficits versus just a normal weight loss deficit structure is two completely psychological things, not physiological things.
yeah, 100%. What is something that looks good on paper, but doesn't always work as well in the real world?
Hmm. That's a really tough one because there's so many. Like I could list isometrics, the surplus debate, and just there's just a lot of I can't nail that down to a single thing. There's just a lot.
I think people want to hear you specifically talk about the main gaining and the surplus
Hmm.
debate. So I think we can kind of narrow it into that section. So we'll talk, especially since we've been talking about protein. If you want to just keep it on the topic of nutrition, what is something, yeah, I guess nutritionally, that the research shows one thing, but then when you actually try to implement it, it's not as easy. So the bulking debate, right? Do you need a surplus? It's basically, can you maximize
Hmm.
hypertrophy at maintenance? And I think it's very important that we don't turn this into a semantics
Yep.
argument, because that's a lot of the time what happens is people. So we need to clearly define maintenance first, which
I would define
I think the
maintenance
best way to do it is to use the way that it's defined in the literature.
maintain body weight. That is what I think maintenance is. Everyone that's saying main gaining is maintenance. Listen, just because you keep your relative body fat percentage the same. How do you keep your relative body fat percentage the same? You need to add fat. By definition, storing fat is a surplus. But either way, I still think main
Yes.
gaining maintenance doesn't really matter. You don't need a surplus at all to maximize hypertrophy. So either definition, maintain body weight, it doesn't really matter because I don't think at all being storing fat is not needed to maximize hypertrophy. But there's a caveat to that
And you
because
think this indefinitely? So
you need to at least have body fat for that statement to hold true, right? You can't be sub 10 thinking you're going to maximize hypertrophy while at maintaining body weight because you're going to keep burning fat. You're going to keep adding muscle. Your body fat, relative body fat percentage is going to drop within non-normal levels at which you can't maximize hypertrophy. So the entire argument of the entire thing about this argument is that you need to have body fat. So by definition, their strongman, the other opposing side's argument is that, since you need to gain fat, you need to have a surplus to maximize hypertrophy. They're two completely unrelated things. The argument is about maximizing hypertrophy within normal body fat percentage levels.
that sets the stage.
Mm.
So why is it that, so I guess you're saying that we can maintain our body weight and maximize hypertrophy, which in practice will look like we're going to be increasing lean mass, decreasing fat mass. What level do you think that this ends at? When am I too lean to effectively just recomp? Because we can't, like you said, we
Uh-huh.
can't recomp at sub 10%.
Yep.
Where is that level where I'm too lean?
So I want to say the lower ranges of the healthy body fat percentage, but that's going to be individualized because everybody can handle different body fat percentages and be perfectly fine. So one person might feel great at 12, somebody else might not. So it's completely individual based. So that's why I say lower ranges. But I that's a really straw man argument just to be like, oh, what about people that are way too lean? We live in America. All right. You are not. I want you to tell me 4 people at your gym that is 12% body fat right now. You can't, unless they're getting ready for a show or just naturally, just not naturally, but just in a diet phase where they want to get lean. You're not going to see those people that are 12%. So I think that argument is so dumb just because we live in such a world of insane increase in obesity. Like, we're not seeing these people on a day to day basis.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think that, of course, it is going to be individualized of where people can, where this recomp effect has. And I think,
Hmm.
too often with this world of social media, everyone wants absolutes and they don't want to hear it depends as the answer.
Hmm.
But that really is the answer. When we are making these prescriptions, we do live in the US. And even if you are outside of the US, in the
It's still
US, it's
increasing. It's still
75% of
increasing.
all adults. Yeah. And there's actually a new paper just came out saying that that 75% number is off because that's using BMI. And there's a lot of, the funny thing is a lot of people say BMI is bad because you can't apply it to, they'll say, oh, well, a
Mhm,
bodybuilder. So like myself, for example, I'm overweight by BMI standards, but a new paper just came out and they found that BMI is actually not as reliable as we thought because it's underestimating the amount of people that are overweight and obese. So if anything, that 75% number is low
also,
and
majority of
it's
people
growing.
don't
And then
exercise.
when we look at other countries, Australia, yeah,
So, like, it's just a
yeah, the
general
average person does not
statement. The BMI is a
lift.
general statement because the average person does not muscle build. Sad to say, but it's just reality. BMI was just made to generalize an entire world. You can't add in all these nuances and small details to everybody, Like, they're trying to generalize everybody into one.
It's just like the 2,000 calorie per day recommendation or diet.
Mhm,
It's literally you're taking a 19-year-old girl who is, 100 pounds is in the same data set and is being averaged out as a fucking 33-year-old man
mhm.
who is 387 pounds. So that's why that number ends up getting so tricky is because when we're trying to make population wide averages and we have so much variance of things are going to fall through the cracks. So hopping back into bulking, why you're saying that I can maintain my weight and I will be maximizing hypertrophy until I get to
Yep,
whatever
yep,
my body says is too low of a body fat percentage,
yep,
whether
and
that's
that's
around 12%, whether that's 12% or 10% is going to be individualized.
Yep. And that's when you need to be in a surplus to gain body fat. Body fat. Key distinction. Body fat, not the same as muscle growth. All right. You need one for body fat to maintain optimal hormonal function for you versus muscle growth because muscle growth is not energy dependent. Energy dependent, I say, because it takes like about 7 calories per gram of contractile tissue, and you are not growing that many grams a day. It's very slim, very few. At most, even averaged out, it's like what, like 60, 30 calories a day. And when you're becoming more advanced in the gym, the number becomes even less and less. So it doesn't take a lot of calories. All those calories that are needed to maximize hypertrophy are already in your total caloric expenditure. But yes, essentially, you would need a surplus when you get
100%.
too lean to gain body fat to continue that progress. And this is where main gaining comes in because main gains neglects the fact that you have to account for fat gain because it already accounts for fat gain to keep you at the same relative body fat percentage. So that's just the distinction between maintaining body weight versus main gaining, which is a slight surplus. That slight surplus isn't for hypertrophy. It's just to account for body fat.
Okay. So I think everyone can agree that a deficit is not the ideal condition for hypertrophy.
No,
Or I
but
guess I guess that's the
we
question
could
is do
dive
you
into
think you
that.
can
We could dive
maximize
into that.
hypertrophy in a deficit?
I do think we can maximize hypertrophy in
Yeah.
a
Let's
deficit,
let's
given
talk
the
about it.
fact we have body fat. All right. Since that's out of the equation, you have body fat. All right. You are, let's say 17,
Mhm.
15%, right? You have body fat. You can maximize hypertrophy in a deficit as long as that deficit isn't great enough to reduce basal MPS or becomes a stressor. Because in order to prove that a deficit cannot maximize hypertrophy, one, you would have to send me a singular paper that shows AMPK is increased or significantly increased automatically when you become in a deficit. People need to understand that deficits, calories, all of this are on a continuum. A 500 calorie deficit is not the same as a 50 to 100 calorie deficit. Another thing is you would have to send me a paper that shows basal protein synthesis is automatically decreased as soon as you get into a deficit. Once again, it's on a continuum. So we're talking about 50 to 100 calorie deficit. People take data that we see on 500 plus caloric deficits, seeing loss in lean body mass. But that's lean body mass is grouped together with everything that's not fat. So it can be glycogen, contractile tissue, but a lot of these papers, it's not actually contractile tissue loss that you lose in these deficit papers. So they take that conclusion of lean body mass loss, like you can't build muscle in a deficit. You can't maximize hypertrophy in a deficit, which is just an outright flawed statement. Because if you actually look at the mechanisms, there's nothing telling us that, hey, just automatically in a deficit means that we have a reduction in hypertrophy.
100%. I would agree with that. So I guess what level, again, we're trying to make practical takeaways here. So at what level of someone, let's say I just want to go into a deficit, but I don't want to, we'll say I'm I'm around the average guy, so I'm in my low to mid 20% body fat percentage, low to mid 20s, and I want to go into a deficit, but I want to be growing muscle while I'm doing it. I don't want to sacrifice my muscle growth. How big of a deficit can I go into being relatively sure that I'm maximizing growth at the same time?
I want to add something in from the previous statement that I said is that we actually have papers showing increased muscle growth with a 40% reduction of a deficit in calories, 40% reduction in calories. I think that's a very important piece of evidence we can include there. Just to throw out any of the Neanderthal old mythologies saying, oh, you can't build muscle at all in a deficit. So I'm just going to throw that 40% reduction is crazy to
Yeah.
gain muscle.
Yeah.
And you probably
No,
know exactly what
100%.
paper I'm talking about.
But again,
I can't name it on the top of my head.
yeah, I I think so. I believe. But yeah, not off the top of my head.
Hmm.
But I guess so are you saying that you're saying that, like, again, for the practical takeaway, I want to lose fat, I want to gain muscle at the same time. How big of a deficit should I go into?
I would say
What would be your
within
practical recommendation?
my practical recommendation is going to be within like 500 or less calories. Because at that point, we do see papers in reductions of lean body mass, which that it typically is probably due to glycogen and water. So you want to be able to maintain proper macronutrients while you're in your deficit. And I think the range of like 100 to 500 is a good start to be in when you want to try to maximize per se. But once again, getting deeper and deeper into the deficit. So the closer 500 range, you might not be maximizing, but you're like 85% to 90%. So if you want to maximize hypertrophy deficit, I say like 100 to 300 calorie deficit, given the fact you have body fat, like we said before. That's my practical takeaway.
Okay. Yeah. No, I would agree. I think you could ideally, I mean, I don't see a reason of what this is, again, where it depends, because
Hmm.
I think, if, of course, it's going to depend on, one is how much body fat do you have?
Yep.
Two is how trained are you?
If we take
And
somebody
three is how
that's
long is this deficit?
new to the gym, like super high body fat percentage, right? You could push that number a little bit higher. You could probably drop down past 500 and still technically maximize gains or build quite a lot of muscle just because they have so much stored energy, stored fat. Compared to if you took somebody that's
Yeah.
150
100%.
pounds, 13%, that's a totally different story.
Yeah. No, I would agree. I would agree totally. There's just, so I think, again, trying to get to the how can we apply this? Essentially, the more fat you have on your body, the bigger a deficit that you can go into, and you can stay in that deficit for longer
Hmm.
without sacrificing muscle. Okay. So I think that is the practical takeaway. And again, because when we're talking about, you know, you can strawman us all you want.
Hmm.
We're trying to cut through this science and cut through the BS and talk about things that you can actually walk away from this. You can walk away from this podcast knowing what you need to do. If you're in that average guy range, you're in the 20 to 25% body fat range, you'll be good in that 1 to 300 calorie deficit. That will take a long time.
Yeah,
I want that to be clear as well, that you're not going
same.
to be losing fat very fast in this. But if you know that you're maximizing hypertrophy while you're in this, you really don't need to worry about it too much. You will see a beautiful recomp
Also,
effect happening. And
Also, sometimes it's not all about trying to maximize hypertrophy per se. You gotta shift your goals at some point. Like, what do I want to do? Do I want to lose more fat quickly? Then you need to push that deficit further. And if you push that deficit further, you risk the chances of maximizing hypertrophy. You gotta shift that goalpost. So it's not an argument of whether or not maximizing
definitely.
or growing muscle. It's just, what are your circumstances? Are you willing to sacrifice maybe the 10% growth you could have gotten with a slower deficit? Or are you satisfied with that potential 10% loss? You know what I'm saying? And also, I want to go back into the earlier arguments about straw
Mhm.
manning. One of the biggest straw mans I hear is, how do I get from 140 pounds, 13% body fat to 190 pounds, 30% body fat? First of all, going to 190 pounds, I don't know how tall you are, what drugs you're on. Being 190 pounds lean at the average height of a man, let's push that number to 200 because everybody loves the number 200 lean. You're not. You're not going to get 200 lean as a natural athlete below 5'11". I'm sorry. Unless you're taking gear or you're that 0.0000001% of the population, it's not happening. But back to the strongman argument. Let's take that a little bit smaller, 140 to 150, same body fat percentage, a surplus. That's just how it is. You're going to gain muscle at the same time you're gaining fat, but that gained muscle had zero correlation to that surplus. That surplus only has that correlation to body fat gain. So you're combining both body fat and muscle gain to get to that 150. That's the straw man argument. Oh, yeah, but I need a surplus. Yes, you do. Okay, congrats. You straw man your entire point just for it to have zero correlation to hypertrophy, but fat gain.
I would 100% agree because, yeah, if you are, I mean, it's just a basic math equation, right? That's how percentages work. As one goes up, the other goes up as well. It's fractions, right? So that is, you will need to gain fat to get to that next
Mm-hmm.
muscle mass. So in that case, you will need a surplus. And of course, this is where different practitioners are going to give different recommendations. And at the end of the day, it's really not going to be super different. So you have a lot of people who will say you need to just maintain your relative body fat percentage. And I would agree with that. That's how I
Yep.
program for my clients if they are
Mm-hmm.
lean enough already.
100%.
If you
100%.
are
Usually, most
already lean
people I
enough,
put
so and in this case,
slight calorie surplus for my lean clients, but anybody else, you are going to maintain body weight or be in a deficit.
100%. Yeah. And that's, yeah, only for my guys that are under 15% are you going to
Mm-hmm.
be maintaining your body fat percentage. If you are above 15%, you're going to be maintaining your weight.
Like, the more advanced you are, the higher body fat percentage, I would, or 15, I would still probably just do a deficit instead of maintaining body weight, just because, like, the amount of tissue you're actually going to grow, it's going to take a very, very long time just for that body fat percentage to drop from a recomp. But if you're somewhere new to the gym, 100%, you're 15, you're 17%, maintain body weight.
100%. And so we do have a brand new meta analysis. It is not peer reviewed yet, it is just a preprint, but it is called Modeling the Trajectory of Skeletal Muscle Hypertrophy During Resistance Training, Systematic Review, and meta analysis. This preprint literally came out earlier this month. So this is as new as it gets. What they found is, of course, this is going to be a little bit of a rough estimate because a lot of these are just kind of, they check in with you. They kind of just bring you back to the lab and they're like, hey, have you been training? And the guy will say, yeah. And they're like, okay, hop in this DEXA. And then they kind of bring them back a little bit later. Of course, we have indirect measures. We have that. There was another paper about, we can get into this as well, of just, this is getting more into the nerd shit, but there was another paper about how ultrasound and MRI have significant differences in what they see, and how, and the researchers came to the conclusion that I don't necessarily agree with, that ultrasound is just not a good measure of hypertrophy. I don't think it's as good as MRI, but I don't think it's something that we just necessarily need to throw away.
Hmm.
But anyways, with those limitations in mind, what they found from this meta-analysis is that over at 48 weeks, the estimated increase in muscle size is around 11.31%. And then at 78 weeks, the estimated cumulative increase is 12.58%. After 1 year, you can expect to grow your muscles by 11%. So let's make the math easy. Let's say I start out and I do a DEXA scan and they find that I have 100 pounds of muscle mass on me. 1 year of training will get me to 111 pounds of muscle mass. 2 years of training will put me at 12, 13 if we're being generous, 13 pounds of muscle mass. So that the diminishing returns after your first year are insane. Genuinely
Hmm.
insane. Like we're looking at going from an increase of 11% to an increase of 1%. 1.27% is how much you can expect to increase your muscle mass after 1.5 years. So I
Yep.
guess when we're looking at it that way, your year over year increase is only a couple percent.
It
So
is
you're
so
looking at
slim
maybe putting
after
on a
those
couple
first two
pounds. Like
years. Yep.
people
A little
always
bit of
like to
pounds.
overestimate it.
And if we take that, let's cycle that back into the surplus thing. If you're in a 200 calorie surplus year round, that's a lot of fat, a lot of fat compared to those numbers of actual muscle growth you're actually
Yeah.
achieving. Unbelievable, unbelievable. And they still think, but you need to be in a surplus in this so long. If you do that, you're going to get fat. Utilize the surplus when it's needed.
Yes. Utilize the surplus when you are too lean. If you have to ask, am I too lean? No, because you will know when you are too lean. You
Mm,
will know, I promise you, because anyone who has been too lean, you feel like shit. You will feel like complete dog shit after you and the amount of people that have dropped sub 10% is so low. It's so low because we don't have a good way of detecting what your body fat percentage is. Skin folds are probably the best because we have DEXA scans are good so the caveat here that people don't seem to get is they're like, oh, but DEXA scans are the gold standard in research. Yes, because that's how accuracy works. When I take 19 different DEXA scans, yeah, it gets a lot better. But your one-off DEXA scan is not very accurate. And when we're talking, and the percentage error is normally up to around 5%, either way. So you can go in one day and get a DEXA scan, and it'll tell you that, let's say your true body fat percentage is 10%. You could go in one day, get a DEXA scan, and it's going to tell you that you're 5%. And you could go in that same day, get the same DEXA scan with the same operator, and it'll tell you that you're 15%
mhm.
because it's 5% both ways. That is not useful at all. So you have people that think that they have gotten to these extremely low body fat percentages, and they really have never touched them.
Yeah, you will know.
And
You will know when you
going
get
back
down there.
into this is even funnier. There's a new paper just came out about surpluses. We just got this today. Actually, it was the first day I read it. Was this morning. It's kind of insane that I was looking at it before we hopped on and started recording. It was comparing. It wasn't even like it's not a bulk versus maintain, but it almost turned into one. So the point of this paper was time restricted eating in a surplus versus just a control group who's just in a surplus eating whenever they want. So ad libitum eating versus time restricted. And what ended up happening was we saw what we normally see with time restricted eating is that people eat less because obviously they're trying to shovel a 500 calorie surplus into 8 hours is a little bit tough. So they were supposed to be eating, their planned eating was 2,900 for the TRE group, for the intermittent fasting group, and their actual was 2,600. And then the control was supposed to eat 3,100 and their actual was 3,000. So, but both of them, they were in a surplus, and there was a familiarization phase with dietary protocols. So they were supposed to be in a 300 to 500 calorie surplus, but the actual values that they ended up eating, the time restricted group, since they only ended up eating 2,500 calories, the actual surplus they were in was not very large. They were still in a surplus because when we look at what happened to their body weight, it increased significantly. It increased on average by 2 kilograms. So that's about 5 pounds, which
Mhm.
is pretty fucking steep. Like in over 12 weeks, that's a fairly large increase. Because if we're aiming for, obviously, some people will gain. First of all, let's just nip this shit in the bud right now of you need a 500 calorie, like I'm going to eat 500 calories over my maintenance every day and gain a pound a week. Cause I fell victim to that when I first started.
Yep, same
Brother, you're
here,
not
same
gaining
here.
52 pounds of muscle in a year.
Gaining maybe
You
like
are not gaining 52
2
pounds of muscle in a year.
depending on how many years of experience you have, like 1 to 5 or even less if you're super advanced.
Yeah.
But a
Like
newbie,
even,
you're like in that like 5 to 10
yeah. And
range,
let's
man.
give
You are
you,
not anything. You are not gaining
mhm.
42 pounds of muscle a
And let's give
year.
you the benefit of the doubt. Yeah, let's give you the benefit of the doubt. We're going to say you're a hyper responder and you have everything dialed in. You have everything dialed in and you're a hyper responder. We'll say you're going to grow 15 pounds in a year. You still don't need the surplus you need to put on 15 pounds is like 200 calories. Like, so even if there's really no reason to have and you're probably going to hit this the way that I normally have clients when they're maintaining their body fat percentage, which again is a surplus, is I'll just have them track throughout the week. And then on the weekends, I'll be like, just go have a couple free meals, go have a couple off plan meals, go on a date with your girlfriend, go enjoy a nice dinner with your family. Like
Mhm,
that will give you the surplus that you need. Because again, we're talking of you don't need it. Your weekly surplus doesn't need to be that big. And that's assuming that you're gaining 15 pounds of muscle in a year. That's assuming that we're giving you every benefit of the doubt possible. And you still don't need to go over a 200 calorie per day surplus.
mhm.
And every time that we look at the literature for this, we look at the Helms paper. Everyone shits on the Helms paper as if we can't take away anything from it. Even Helms himself doesn't like his own research.
Mhm.
And when we look at that one and then you look at Garth, like these are the classic bulking papers of this is where, again, I'll always ask of what that mechanism is that is why is that one Oreo over my maintenance
Yep.
giving me
You would have to
more
prove
gain?
to me you would have to prove to me that a surplus automatically enhances the hypertrophy myop stimulus, which you can't because there's 0 papers on this and there's 0 reasoning that why it ever would. Like, what's that Oreo doing? What is the Oreo doing? Nothing. It's doing nothing. And these people, I'm going to bring this up, is that they like to bring up one paper we have in bodybuilders of a surplus gaining more muscle than the non-surplus group. If you look at the methodologies and what they gave the participants, they gave them triple the amount of protein they possibly ever needed. I think it went up to like 4.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. That's insane. Unless you're on an extreme deficit, those numbers do not need to be touched. So no crap. A surplus was able to help you a little bit because your macro management was poor. Macro management is another thing of this issue. You need to get your macros on point because if you don't, of course a surplus is going to be better. You know, like it doesn't take 2 rocket scientists to figure out, hey, maybe if I'm eating 100 grams of carbs versus 300, I might grow more. I might have more energy to go push myself in the gym. You know, it doesn't take 2 astrophysicists to understand basic concepts. Like, so no crap, that surplus where you actually were able to meet a minimum dosage response to which you can actually perform properly would help.
I 100% agree. And again, just looking over this paper again, I haven't really had time to super deep dive into it. We essentially have a small surplus versus a big surplus paper. And what we found is both groups increased their weight. So both groups were in a surplus. We know that for a fact. Both groups were in a surplus. And we have time restricted eating. So the smaller surplus gained on average, again, 2.19 kilograms, and the control group gained 3.9 kilograms. So we have a significant effect size of that over these 12 weeks, they did gain a significant amount of weight, and we have a significant difference between the groups. So that tells us there was a significant difference. There was in both the growth from time 0 to the end of the trial. And then we also have a significant difference between the groups. But when we look at fat-free mass, did the bigger surplus lead to a bigger increase in muscle? No, the fuck it did not. 1.34 is the average increase for the time restricted eating group. And again, when we're talking about differences in calories, so we have a 400 calorie difference in
Hmm.
surplus values, and we see 0 difference in fat free mass. Again, this is DEXA, it's indirect, right? So I know that people are going to hate on that. They're going to say this is an indirect measurement. Oh, okay. So yeah, the fat free mass differences, the muscle mass differences, they are not see, they're not there. We don't see it. But let's look at something that doesn't change. Let's look at something that's an objective measure. Let's look at the strength. Oh, they gained the same amount of strength as well. There's no difference. So getting more fat did not lead to more muscle or more strength. Once again, this is always my argument as well, is so if we need that surplus to increase our hypertrophy potential, why does that affect, or whatever this mystical mechanism that you're coming up with, why does it not scale with the surplus? And if there is no way for it to scale with the surplus, then is it just not being in a deficit is what you're saying the reasoning is for needing a surplus? Is just, you don't need a surplus, you just need to be not in a deficit. And to that I would say, then why can't I just be at maintenance if I just need to not be in a deficit? And just some other things with the paper, they also tested the hormones of the groups, and the ones that people will be interested in are the testosterone and the IGF-1. And neither group saw significant changes in either.
Going back to the hormonal thing, people see some papers that say, oh, IGF-1 increased a little bit in the surplus group, as if normal fluctuations of hormones even have any effect on hypertrophy alone. That is something mind blowing to me because we have papers of them
Dude,
giving them IGF-1, zero difference. Zero difference. It's like, okay, cool, man.
this is a
Have
whole
you read
nother
any
can
of
of
these other
worms.
papers? It's just another can of worms that makes zero physiological sense because, once again, normal fluctuations in hormones mean absolutely nothing. Nothing until it reaches a threshold at which that
Exactly.
threshold is met to actually have an effect. But then going back to what you said earlier about,
Yeah.
oh, why can't I just be
No,
at maintenance? People are going to say, oh, why not just be in a surplus just to make sure you're on maintenance because your fluctuations of maintenance calories are changing? We said this ages ago. You can maximize hypertrophy in a deficit. So why is going 50 calories, right? Because that fluctuations are going to be significant enough. Why is going into a 50 calorie deficit detrimental? Detrimental. Why is it automatically boom? Is hypertrophy shut off? No, because we explained why. That doesn't make any sense. So those fluctuations don't matter. One day you can be in a surplus, next day maintenance, next day deficit, next day surplus, and it means nothing. All right. Those small fluctuations, nothing. It's just a straw man argument with zero evidence,
agreed.
zero, just nothing, nothing to it. It's just a, hey, look at this, but that. 0 cents. Support paper. Tell me once again, back earlier, one paper that shows AMPK is increased automatically in a deficit or significantly increased, or basal MPS is reduced automatically in a deficit, or it becomes a stressor automatically in a deficit. You won't, because it doesn't exist and it's not real.
I agree 100%. So now we are reaching the latter end of the segment. We're definitely going to need to do a part two because there's just so much shit
There's so
in this
much we can go
space.
into, and a bunch of it's just a
And
bunch of straw mans.
so many people ask a lot of different things, but I think just this topic is so big of just the
Mhm.
bulking and the main gaining and gaining in a deficit and things like that we can just we could talk about this topic again for another fucking 2 hours. But I do so we close every episode with the anabolic analysis. So this is where we really want to get into, this is where everyone gets the same questions. So first is, what is something that you have changed your mind about over the course of your career?
Course of my career, expanding. There's so many things I've changed my mind on. On one, it was definitely bulking was a huge turning point in my life. I was like, why am I in this surplus for no apparent reason? I am 220 pounds. My peak bulk, I went to 220 pounds. Useless. Useless. I cut down. I am 172. I weigh less than what I started that bulk at. Like 3 years later. That's unbelievable. You don't have that much muscle mass to begin with. Everyone overestimates how much they actually have. But other than that, there's just like tiny things. Like I remember we talked about the post carbs after we work out. And I thought maybe some fibers could get some glycogen in those before the muscle damage period starts. And then you're like, what about the type 2 fibers? Even though GLU24 is enhanced, digestion slowed. So how do we even know that those fibers are going to be uptaking glycogen? And we see it in those papers, mechanism and outcome papers. Like it, crap. Maybe it does it. I mean, I'm still going to throw in that hypothetical of nuance of maybe a little bit of fibers, but like speaking generally, that means nothing. That means nothing. So it's just like small little conversations like that that I just changed my mind on based on research. That's the one thing I do change my mind on is when research comes out. But there's some things where if the research is poor, I'm not going to fall for it until we see actual mechanistic and outcome data with it.
I 100% agree. And I think that's the sign of a good practitioner, a good coach is someone that's not afraid to change their mind, someone that actually appreciates the science and the data, right? If you prove me wrong, if you show me some studies and you prove me wrong, then yeah, I will change my mind with the data, with the mechanism. I think that everyone's gotten so culty with
Hmm.
everything. And like you come up with terms like mechanism cell and outcome cell. And it's just, you're spitting in the face of science. The whole point of science is to have a hypothesis and to test the
Hmm.
shit out of it. You're trying to break your own beliefs. I listen to people who don't share beliefs as me, the same belief as me, because I go into it wanting to understand their point, because clearly there's always, they have reasoning for them, right? Like people, the bulking debate, the people who believe in it, they have some solid evidence, but it's just not enough in my opinion to
Hmm.
change my goal. So the second question is, what is your hottest take? What would you say that if someone was like, what is the one thing that every time you say it gets a lot of hate? It might just be what this whole fucking podcast has been about.
A hot topic, but the hot topic for me is that I don't think failure is achieved through peripheral mechanism or that the muscle fatigues completely when we hit failure. I think it's more so to deal with the central governor theory and the integrated central governor aspect that our brain hits a tolerance and stops resistance training per se. But that deserves an
Okay.
entirely different
Dig a little bit
podcast.
deeper into there.
There's just
Yeah.
so much we can just
Yeah.
go in.
We
I
can
could go on
definitely
about
talk about
this.
the
But that's something that I've baffled heads with. I've gotten into arguments. It's like, listen here. You would have to explain to me this, but you can't. There's zero evidence, zero nothing. Like the one thing they want to talk about is that, oh, look at the voluntary activation deficit in this thing. It's 99%, right? There's 1% of a deficit. But then you read the study and they're BSM'd, strapped up. The only thing they cognitively can do is extend their quad. It's single joint. They have 4 straps on them, but yet they still see a voluntary activation deficit, meaning not all of the fibers were activated. But then you take that into a gym application. You're not strapped down BSM through many different seatbelts and machinery. And the only thing you can do is just move forward, push forward, not worrying about your ankle rotation, push forward, right? There's so many variables in the gym that voluntary activation deficit is going to be higher. So tell me how that would be physiologically possible to reach that certain amount of percentage of untouched fibers. Why? What's the why? That's always the why, but you can't tell me why. You can't tell me the why. And if you look at the papers of the
yeah, we need
supplementary motor area and its innervation with sensation and perception of effort and its correlation to M1, which M1 is the actual neural drive action potential center, while the supplementary motor area is just like the control hub. It's baffling. Like there was this one study that I looked at where they like influcted messed with the SMA, and that's the only thing that saw perception of effort differences. And when perception of effort was at its maximum, so was the SMA. So it's just like, where can we take this correlated concept? And everybody wants to talk about Marcora's psychological biological model of fatigue. And it's like, oh, he says it doesn't apply to resistance training. People need to understand that PhDs like to stick in their area. If they don't have any enough research on that topic or theorize on that specific topic, they're not going to theorize about it. You know what I mean? But then I find that very hypocritical as well from Marcora for saying that
Mhm.
because he's done multiple studies in resistance training and saw similar outcomes. The only outcomes that might have been different were that high intensity training at 90% loads, which is what a 3 to 4 rep max, who's doing a 3 to 4 rep max to begin with, show minimum reductions. But they still saw minimum reductions in bar velocity speeds. So it's like something is fatiguing them, and it's the what and why, and just the why. Like, why is it occurring? Maybe because the brain has a central governor to the muscle. What sends the action potential to the muscle? But once again, there's
Mhm.
not a lot of data on resistance training in this topic. So the buzz is all over the air. You can have one opinion or the other, and I will respect it just because there's very limited amount of data. But the one thing that ticks me off is when people are so like, this is it and we have data. No, we do not. All right. But there's more data suggesting the brain is the limiting factor. And when I say limiting factor, I'm not saying peripheral fatigue isn't playing a huge part of it, because peripheral fatigue is playing 80% of the reductions in force production. But if you were to tell me that the muscle fatigue, peripheral fatigue mechanism was what's causing that final plug, I would say no. I don't agree with that. I think the brain is the final plug, the final limiter. Once again, what sends the command for the muscle to contract? The brain. That is another podcast that we
I
should
agree.
definitely
I
take
think
on.
that,
I could go into depth.
oh,
I could list
100%.
paper after paper after paper. I've read so much into motor control and motor fatigue. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. People are still saying the muscle completely fatigued. All right. The best case scenario that you can say now is that it's an integrated loop. The muscle communicates to the brain communicates to the muscle, then there's failure. That's the one thing that is 100%. But the final plug, I think it's the brain.
I have to agree. I have to agree. But that is definitely a topic that we can dig way deeper into. And the final question is, what advice would you give someone trying to build their best physique over the next 5 years? What's one practical piece of advice?
Experiment. Experiment. There is so many different variables that might not work for you that might work for others. Like your genetics play a huge role into it. So there's going to be individualized factors into it. Like, listen, I love low volume, but we still have outliers. Somebody could benefit more from doing 4 sets more or 4 sets less. But that's obviously a different topic and a different range variable, because I don't think that range is going to be super high as much as these research papers are showing about volume. But that was just an example of individualized preferences. It's just experiment. Do what you like, see what works best for you, and stick with it. Experiment. Don't be afraid to change things up.
I could not agree more. I could not agree more. I think too many people are afraid to experiment with themselves because resistance training and the gym is something you're going to be doing for your entire life. So you're not restricted by time. If you spend 12 weeks doing some dumb shit and you come back, and the other thing is hypertrophy is stupidly forgiving. It is stupidly
Mhm.
forgiving. There's a reason why you see people doing dumb shit in the gym all the time and they're still growing. They're still big. It's because you can do a lot. When we're comparing these effect sizes, that's what we need to really be looking at, is we're looking at differences in millimeters. So a lot of these are really not even going to show up. And when one paper shows one thing and another shows a different, that again shows you that the differences that we're talking about, a lot of this is just because we're nerds and we like to really get into the mechanisms.
Mhm.
But in the practical takeaway, 90% of your gains is going to be coming from just going to the gym
Going to the
consistently,
gym.
pick up some heavy shit,
Going to
put
the
it back down
gym.
until you can't anymore.
One set
Yeah,
twice a week is enough to grow meaningful muscle. Super forgiving. If we see papers showing super high volumes and super low volumes can grow muscle relatively nearly the same amount, I say relatively because there's a bunch of fluctuation. What does that mean to you? It means to you that working out grows muscle.
crazy. Crazy how that works. Closing questions actually, this works perfectly with your advice. What are you currently experimenting with in your own training, nutrition, and coaching?
So personal training experience. This is my first time doing full body every other day, and I've been loving it. I have been progressing and or maintaining nearly every single one of my lifts. The linear progression is up with some fluctuations up and down, but linearly it's up. And an extreme deficit, like at the beginning of the podcast, I'm nearly in a 1,400 calorie deficit. That's a lot. That's a lot. And I'm still progressing, doing the same exercises I was doing before, but full body every other day. So if that's saying something, like one key way to tell if you're losing muscle or gaining muscle is tracking progression, right? Because past neural adaptations, most of the strength gains are from hypertrophy. So if I'm not regressing and I'm progressively going up, I'm doing a great job at maintaining at least that muscle in an extreme aggressive deficit with full body every other day compared to when I was doing other splits consecutive days. So back in the beginning of the podcast, like consecutive day training with the deficits, I do think super spinal fatigue is going to be greater. Recovery is going to be less. Protein synthesis is going to be less. Or obviously, muscle damage recovery is going to be even slower. So all that stuff adds up. And that is a prime example that I think it adds up. But now, if we take that into a surplus or maintenance, I don't know. Uh, I do think full body is better just based off a couple mechanistic data, but obviously outcome data shows that lifting at least twice a week grows muscles. So that's all I can conclude from that. For
One more question. Where can people find you? And do you have any final thoughts, any final practical takeaways for the listeners?
You can find me mostly on Instagram, King_Deltoids. That's where I post more often on, but I am on all platforms, YouTube, TikTok. Uh, and one last thing, just open your mind. Open your mind. Don't be so dogmatic on one thing on all the time. Be open to change your mind. Be open to stick and be proud of your claims. Like I said, with how I have a passion about the brain causing failure, the final plug, I'm passionate about it. I believe that the data that we have is strong enough for me to make those conclusions. Be passionate, but also you got to be open minded.
That's all we got. Everyone, have a great day. Peace.